My name is Mara Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and last spring I won $4.2 million on a gas station lottery ticket. Then I made the one mistake every lottery lawyer in America begs you not to make. I told my family. 1 week later, a typed document sat on my mother's dining room table. 4 pages. Plastic cover. Little yellow tabs marking where I was supposed to sign. My family had divided my money into tidy percentages, and the slice they left for me, the person holding the winning ticket, was 8%. When I hesitated, my mom set down her coffee and said, "You'd be selfish to keep it." They booked a notary. They invited the whole family over to watch me sign. My brother told me to bring a pen. But here's what none of them knew. The paper I carried into that dining room was not the one they printed. And when I slid it across the table, in front of 11 people and a notary, the room went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the tea glasses. I'll get to that. First, you need to know what came before. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women stop paying for everyone else's peace, and family drama meets its match in patience and paperwork. If stories like that speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Let me tell you who I was before the ticket, because it matters. I run a 2-person bookkeeping and tax office above a bakery in Dayton, Ohio. Every morning at 7, the smell of bread comes up through the floor, and my assistant Josie makes coffee strong enough to file its own extension. I built that office myself. Night classes for my accounting degree while I ran a register at a grocery store. Years of running other people's payrolls before I hung my own sign at 27, working off a folding card table because a real desk cost money I refused to borrow. I'm not exciting. I've made peace with that. I don't do drama. I do arithmetic. My dad, Frank Mitchell, was a mechanic who trusted 2 things in this world: a torque wrench and a written record. When I was 9, he sat me down with a cloth-covered ledger and taught me double-entry bookkeeping the way other dads teach fishing. He had a saying he'd repeat while he wrote, "Keep your own book, Mara. Family forgets what it borrows." I thought it was just mechanic wisdom, like checking your oil. It took me 25 years to understand he was warning me about people we shared a table with every Sunday. Numbers don't lie. People just hire people like me hoping the numbers will lie for them. That's a joke I make at the office, and Josie laughs politely every tax season. I never once imagined I'd be applying it to my own mother. So hold on to this detail because it matters later. For 11 years since my first full-time paycheck at 23, I have kept my own book. Every dollar, both directions. Remember that book. It's the whole story. In my family, money only ever flowed in one direction, and I was the faucet. It started small, the way these things do. 100 here for my sister Brooke's car insurance, 200 there when my mom's furnace acted up. Then it stopped being small. In 2019, my mother's roof started leaking over the kitchen, and the estimate came in at $4,300. Mom called me crying on a Tuesday. I paid the roofer on a Wednesday. Nobody ever mentioned it again, and I mean that literally. Not a thank you card, not a casserole, nothing. My brother Rick runs a heating and air company on the east side, and twice I floated him what he called bridge loans. The bridge, apparently, went one way and then collapsed behind him. Brooke needed tires. Brooke needed a deposit. Brooke's husband Todd had an investment opportunity that was absolutely not a pyramid until it was. I covered my nephew's school fees one fall when Rick's checks were bouncing, and I did it quietly, because embarrassing Rick was a crime in our family, and helping him was a duty. Here's the part that stings. Every single time I was the one who needed something, the answer came back like a recording. "We don't have it to spare." Mom said it. Rick said it. They said it kindly, with sympathetic little head tilts, the way you'd talk to a stranger holding a cardboard sign. And I never pushed back, because I was the stable one, the money person, the daughter who had it handled. Asking my family for help felt like a bank asking its customers for a loan. Ridiculous. Embarrassing. So I stopped asking, but I never stopped writing it down. I want to tell you about the year I was 26. because it's the year that ends up mattering most. My transmission died in the middle of tax season, the same month a cracked molar turned into an emergency dental bill. I was moonlighting my first tax clients on nights and weekends, eating rice and beans. And I was $800 short of keeping my life running, so I did the thing I never did. I asked. I sat in my mother's kitchen, laid it out plainly, and asked for $800, offering to sign a repayment schedule like the professional I was. Mom stirred her tea for a long moment. Then she gave me the head tilt. Honey, we don't have it to spare. The following weekend, she showed the whole church group her brand new patio furniture set. Teak. I looked up the price later, because of course I did. When I mentioned the car to Rick, my big brother, the family's self-appointed man of the house since Dad died, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're the money person, little sister. Figure it out." I rode the bus for 2 months. I told no one, but my Aunt Carol, my dad's sister, a retired nurse with X-ray vision for suffering, noticed me at the bus stop in the rain and pulled over. 2 days later, there was an envelope in my mailbox with $500 and a note that said, "Don't you dare pay me back fast." I paid her back in 6 weeks anyway because that's who I am. And I wrote all of it in my book. Every dollar, both directions. That plain little habit was about to become the most dangerous thing I owned. The ticket happened on a Tuesday in April, at the gas station on Route 48, where I stop when the office runs late. $10 of gas, a bottle of water, and 1 ticket for the state jackpot draw, because the machine was right there, and my horoscope that morning had been obnoxiously cheerful. I didn't think about it again until 10 o'clock that night, standing in my kitchen in socks, half a bowl of cereal for dinner because tax season doesn't believe in cooking. I pulled up the winning numbers on my phone. I checked them once. Then I checked them the way I check a bank reconciliation, left to right, 1 digit at a time, out loud. Then I did it a 3rd time with a pencil, writing each number down, matching them like line items. All 6. $4.2 million. I did not scream. I didn't even sit down for a minute. I just stood there while the refrigerator hummed like nothing had happened. Then the accountant in me took over. And I'm telling you, she has saved my life more than once. I signed the back of that ticket with the blue pen from my work bag, put it inside a freezer bag, locked it in the fireproof box in my closet, and sat on the edge of my bed for 40 minutes with my hands folded like I was in church. And here is the moment I want you to notice. My very first thought was not what to buy. It was, who do I call first? And the fear that crawled up my spine when I pictured the answer. That fear knew something I didn't want to admit yet. I didn't call my mother. I called a lawyer. Smartest thing I ever did. It still almost wasn't enough. Ellen Voss is an estate attorney downtown, 58 years old, with a voice like fine sandpaper and a handshake that means it. A client of mine had used her for a messy inheritance, and I'd kept her card the way you keep a fire extinguisher. 2 days after the ticket, I sat in her office with my freezer bag, and she looked at it the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Then she said the thing that changed everything. "Do not claim this prize. Not yet. Not as yourself." She walked me through it slowly, and I'll spare you the seminar, but here's the shape of it. In Ohio, a trust can claim a lottery prize. If you set the trust up first, before you ever walk into the lottery office, the trust becomes the winner, not you. She recommended an irrevocable trust with a spendthrift clause and an independent trustee, which is lawyer language for a vault where even I couldn't be talked, begged, or guilted into handing out the principal. "Once it's signed and funded, you cannot give it away," she said. "Not to a boyfriend, not to a church, not to your mother crying at your kitchen table. That is the entire point of the instrument." She said drafting would take 2 to 3 weeks if we started now. Then she took off her glasses and gave me the only advice that really mattered. "Tell no one until the trust holds that ticket. Not your friends, not your mother. Especially not your mother." I laughed and said my family wasn't like that. Ellen looked at me the way she probably looks at everyone. "Everyone's family isn't like that," she said. "Until there's a number." All she asked of me was silence. 3 weeks. I couldn't even manage one. Sunday dinner at my mother's house is not an invitation, it's a summons, and I had never missed one in my adult life. So 4 days after Ellen's warning, I was at the old oak table with Mom, Rick and his wife, and Brooke and Todd up from Cincinnati, passing green beans and keeping the biggest secret of my life. I had rehearsed my silence in the car. I was doing fine. Then my mother started in, soft as a lullaby. Her blood pressure medication had gone up again, she said, pressing 2 fingers to her chest. The house was getting to be too much for a widow. And did we realize Dad's anniversary was coming up in June? 6 years, she said, looking right at me. Your father hated secrets in this house. That man kept nothing from family. I know what it was now. It was weather. My mother makes weather, and you find yourself soaked before you remember to look for clouds. But in that chair, at that table, all I felt was the thing that has run my whole life. If you're carrying something this big, and these people are your family, keeping it from them is a kind of theft. Transparency felt like a bill I owed, so I set down my fork and paid it. I have some news, I said. I won the lottery. The big one. $4.2 million. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. I heard Rick's fork click against his plate as he set it down, slow and careful, like a man lowering a weapon. My mother's mouth made a perfect little O, and Brooke's eyes went bright in a way I'd never seen at any of my birthdays. It was the sound of a door unlocking somewhere I couldn't see. It took less than 48 hours for my family to become people I didn't recognize, or maybe to finally become people I did. Rick called me twice a day about holding a family meeting to discuss managing the money, and he used the word structure so often I started hearing it in my sleep. Brooke, who hadn't texted me since Christmas, made a public Pinterest board called Lake House Dreams, and I wish I were inventing that detail. Todd emailed me a plan he'd typed himself, full of tax strategies a first-year student could get disbarred for, if tax students could be disbarred. My mother called every evening at 7, and every call was a rosary of other people's hardships. Rick's business was struggling, did I know? Brooke and Todd's mortgage was brutal. Cousin Dana needed dental work. The family, the family, the family. On Thursday, I drove over to check on her, and I found her at the stove, stirring soup, not looking at me, which is how she delivers her most rehearsed lines. "You'd be selfish to keep it, Mara," she said to the soup. "A person can't sleep on a pile that size while her family struggles." I stood in that kitchen where I'd once been refused $800, and I felt something in me tilt and settle, like a ledger falling open to the right page. I'm an accountant. I've watched audits turn friendly companies into knife fights. I know what it looks like when the numbers change color. I just never thought I'd watch it happen at my mother's stove. On day 8, Rick texted me. Sunday. Mom's house. Family meeting. We put something on paper. They weren't asking me to come discuss. They were asking me to come sign. The document was waiting for me at the second Sunday dinner, laid at my usual place setting like a menu. 4 typed pages in a plastic report cover, the kind Todd buys in bulk. Across the top, in bold, Mitchell Family Distribution Agreement. Little yellow sign here tabs poked out the side. I read it standing up, coat still on, while the pot roast went cold. They had divided $4.2 million into percentages, and I promise you every word of this is accurate. Mom, 30%, $1.26 million, for the house and her retirement. Rick, 22%, $924,000, listed as business stabilization. Brooke and Todd, 22%, matching, for their fresh start. 10% set aside for extended family, which explained why my cousins had started liking my old photos online. 8% into something called the Mitchell Family Fund, to be managed, and I had to read this twice, by Rick. And at the bottom, my line. Mara, 8%, $336,000, of my own money. They had left me a tip. Todd spread his hands like a man presenting a birthday cake and said, "It's a gift agreement, fully standard. I sanity checked it myself. My mother reached over and squeezed my wrist. We kept it fair, sweetheart. Everyone gets a future. And Rick, leaning back with his arms crossed, delivered the line he'd clearly been saving all week. Don't overthink it, little sister. Numbers are your thing. Family is mine. I did not argue. I didn't raise my voice or ask them if they had lost their collective minds. I told them I'd take my copy home and read it carefully, which every person in that room heard as yes, because to them, careful has always been my whole personality. Never sign anything at the table it's served on. Dad taught me that too. Before I tell you what I did with that folder, let me ask you something. Have you ever been handed a bill for your own blessing? Has someone ever done the math on your money without you in the room? If that's ever been you, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And subscribe if you haven't, because what my family did over the next 3 weeks, you'll want to see how it ends. I drove to my mother's house on Tuesday to talk to her alone, because some part of me still believed that without an audience, my mom would look at that document and see what I saw. I sat at her kitchen table and said it plainly. Mom, this isn't fair, and I think you know it. What I got back was a performance I'd seen pieces of my whole life, finally assembled into its full touring production. Her eyes welled on cue. She'd been alone 6 years. Did I know what that was like? She'd raised the 3 of us on nothing, sewn Brooke's prom dress by hand, gone without so we could have. And now God finally sends this family a miracle, she said, pressing a tissue under one eye, and my own daughter wants to keep it in a box. I asked who wrote the agreement. She waved the question away. Todd helped. Rick oversaw it. It was all of us, honey. That's what family means. All of us. There it was again. That little unlocking sound. This wasn't a bad weekend idea. It was organized. Then she reached across the table, took both my hands and lowered her voice to the register she saves for funerals. You'd be selfish to keep it, she said. If you loved this family, the split would already be signed. Your father would be ashamed of what you're becoming. I want you to know I kept my voice level, because I'd promised myself I would. I said I loved her, and that I'd see her Sunday. Then I sat in my car in her driveway and learned something new about my mother. She had already photocopied the agreement and mailed it to my aunts. By Friday, my phone was ringing with numbers I hadn't seen in years. Rick came to my office on Thursday, in the middle of business hours, wearing his company polo like a uniform of authority. He didn't make an appointment. He walked past Josie's desk, sat on the corner of my desk, on top of a client's file, and picked up my stapler like he was appraising it. We need to talk about Sunday, he said. My brother is 39, and since Dad died, he has appointed himself chairman of a family that never held an election. This family has a structure, Mara. Dad's gone. That makes me the one who signs off on big moves. It's not personal. It's order. I told him a lottery ticket wasn't a family asset, and he smiled the way he smiles at customers who question an invoice. Then he tried a different tool. People remember who shared and who hoarded, he said, quietly, reasonably. You want to be 40 and alone at Thanksgiving? Because that's how that happens. Josie had gone very still at her desk, pretending to alphabetize things that were already alphabetized. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. This is my office, Rick. In here, people make appointments. He stared at me for a second too long, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes that I couldn't read yet. Something that looked less like greed and more like fear wearing greed's jacket. At the door he stopped, close enough that only I could hear it. Some of us don't have until Christmas, he said. And then he was gone, boots loud on my stairwell. I stood there a moment, breathing in bread smell and aftershave. Until Christmas. I wrote the phrase in my book that night, in the margin, with a question mark. Accountants don't like question marks. They have a way of becoming line items. While Rick worked me from above, my little sister worked me from below, and honestly, of the 2 campaigns, hers was the more professional operation. Brooke has spent 31 years being the fun one, and it turns out the fun one has reach. Within a week, the family group chat, a chat I was still in, mind you, filled up with articles about lottery winners who went bankrupt, captioned things like, "So sad when money changes people." At my mother's church, where I have attended exactly 2 Easter services in a decade, word spread that Lorraine's middle girl had come into money and gone cold. My cousin Dana called asking for $20,000, and when I gently said no, she sighed and said, "Wow, so it's true what Brooke's been saying." Even my mother's neighbor Pat gave me a look at the grocery store, the specific Midwestern look that means we have discussed you at length. Here's what fascinated me, in the way a car crash fascinates. I had not refused anyone anything, except one cousin's request for 20 grand. I hadn't bought so much as a new coat. The only people who had made plans for my money were the ones calling me a hoarder, the same people splitting my jackpot into percentages like a pie they'd baked themselves. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, and I'll tell you why. Silence is unpaid interest. It compounds. Every day I said nothing. They got more confident, and confident people write things down. Then, 20 days after the ticket, Ellen's office called. "It's filing week," she said. "Come in Thursday. Bring your identification and that ticket." A pause, dry as her voice. "And Mara, bring nobody." We named it the Cardinal Trust. My dad kept a bird feeder outside the garage his whole life, and he loved the cardinals best because, he said, they show up in winter, when everything else quits on you. Ellen didn't blink at the name. She just wrote it down, which is its own kind of kindness. Here is what I signed that Thursday, in a conference room smelling of coffee and toner, with 2 of Ellen's associates as witnesses. An irrevocable trust, with a spendthrift clause, and an independent corporate trustee, a fiduciary firm Ellen's office has worked with for 20 years. The trust would claim the prize, taking the lump sum cash option. After federal and state taxes, the real number landing in the trust would be about $2.7 million, which tells you something about the fantasy math my family had been doing on 4.2. I would be the beneficiary, receiving distributions on a schedule, enough to live well and safely forever if I stayed sensible. And the principal? Locked. Ellen went over it one more time, slowly, like a pilot doing a walk around. "Once this is signed and funded, you cannot hand out the principal. Not to your mother, not to your brother, not even to yourself on a week Tuesday. If someone pressures you, the trustee is legally required to refuse. That is the entire point." I signed my name 3 times. No trumpets, no cameras, just the scratch of a pen and Ellen's associate stamping pages. That was the moment I won, if you want to know the truth. Weeks before my family ever found out. In a beige room, in business casual. The following week, the trustee claimed the prize, and the public record would show only that the jackpot from Route 48 had been claimed by something called the Cardinal Trust. And no, I did not cancel my family's signing dinner. They had booked a room to watch me sign something. Fine, I would bring something worth the show. That weekend, digging through my fireproof box for the trust paperwork's new home, my fingers found cloth instead of plastic, and I pulled out my father's green ledger. I'd taken it from the garage after the funeral, 6 years ago, and never once opened it, because grief has its own filing system and mine had marked that book "Do Not Touch." I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and opened it. His handwriting. Small, square, patient. Page after page of loans, dated and initialed, going back decades. To Lorraine, for the Florida trip she told the church was a gift from him. To Rick, 8 separate times, starting with a dirt bike in 1999 and ending with $4,000, 3 months before Dad died, marked only R. Shop rent. To his own brother, twice. And down the repayment column, hardly anything. Blank after blank after blank, each one recorded without a single word of complaint, which was the most Dad thing I have ever seen. My father had spent his whole life being the faucet, and he had never told me. He'd just handed me a ledger when I was 9 and taught me to write things down. Then I turned to the last page with writing on it, dated the month before his heart quit, and my breath went somewhere else for a minute. One line in pencil, under all those debts. Mara owed nothing. She never asked. I read it twice. Then I closed the book and sat with my back against the cabinets while the kitchen got dark around me, holding that ledger the way you'd hold someone's hand. He knew. He'd always known. And he'd counted me. And in his accounting, I was the one column that balanced. Monday morning, I took the green ledger to my office, set it on my desk next to my keyboard, and started building a document of my own. It took me 3 evenings, and I approached it the way I approach a client audit, because if I let it be personal, I wasn't going to finish. I pulled 11 years of my own bank statements. I exported every transfer, every payment app record, every canceled check. I went back through years of text messages, and let me tell you, there is a special feeling that comes over you at 11 at night, reading a decade of your own family texts in one sitting. The pattern you lived through one favor at a time looks different laid out on a screen. It looks like a business model. I built a document with 2 columns and called it what it was. Statement of record. Column 1, given. The roof. October 2019. $4,300, paid directly to the contractor. Brooks Tires. Brooks Deposit. Rick's 2 bridge loans. My nephew's school fees. Fall semester. Paid to the school. Line after line after line, 8 pages of them, dated, sourced, documented, totaled at the bottom like any honest statement. $61,400 over 11 years. Column 2, asked. It was a short column. The $800. March. The year I was 26. Next to it, in the space where an amount should be, I typed the answer I received instead. Word for word. Because I will hear it in my mother's voice, until I die. We don't have it to spare. Repayments received from anyone, ever. 0. I want to be clear about what this document was, because it matters. It was not evidence. No court would ever see it, and none needed to. This wasn't a case file. It was a mirror for a dining room. I printed 2 sets, clipped them in brass fasteners, and slid them into a vanilla-colored folder next to a letter I'd requested from the trustee. 12 pages, all told. They weighed more than the $4.2 million ever did. My mother called on a Monday evening, and her voice had bunting on it. Sunday dinner is going to be special this week, sweetheart. A family celebration. She had invited everyone, she said, and she recited the guest list like a menu. Rick and his wife, Brooke and Todd driving up from Cincinnati, your Uncle Gary and Aunt Carol, the cousins, even Pat from next door who, my mother noted, had always loved me, which was news to both me and, presumably, Pat. And Todd arranged for a notary to come at 7, she said, the way you'd announce a string quartet. So we can make everything official and put this little chapter behind us. A notary. For a family dinner. My mother had catered my surrender and hired a witness. I said I'd be there, and I could hear her smile down the phone line. Wear something nice, she said, and bring a pen, sweetheart. I stood in my kitchen a long while after we hung up, oddly calm, the way the air goes calm before a green sky. Later that week I learned from Dana, who cannot help herself, that Brooke had told the cousins the money would be distributed before Labor Day and that 2 of them had already put deposits on things. People were spending my money out loud now, in group texts, before a single dollar existed outside the trust. The night before the dinner, Ellen called to walk me through it one last time, and her advice was not lawyerly at all. It was older than that. Say nothing until they've finished the whole show, she said. Let them read it all out loud, nice and official. Witnesses work both ways. Wednesday before the dinner, I dropped off my mother's blood pressure refill, because you can be at war with someone and still bring them their medication. Nobody teaches you that. But it's true. I found her at the kitchen table with old photo albums out, and no audience. And for once, no performance. She looked small. Did I ever tell you how my mother died? She asked. I knew pieces. She gave me the whole thing. Grandma Ruth, widowed at 50, cleaning houses in Zanesville, dying at 61 in a rented apartment with a space heater, and the family paying for her casket on an installment plan. My mother was 9 when the lights first got shut off, and she told me about standing in the dark pretending it was a game. "I have been afraid of being poor since I was 9 years old," she said, flat, no tissue, no tremble. "You don't ever stop hearing the sound the electric company makes at the door." And for about 3 seconds, sitting in that kitchen, I nearly did it. I nearly said, "Forget the trust, forget the ledger. I'll take care of you forever, Mom. All of you." Because I finally understood the animal under all of it, and the animal was terror. Then my mother patted my hand, and with the same breath, in the same flat voice, she finished the thought. "So you understand why the split has to happen. A good daughter would have offered before we asked. I shouldn't have had to put it on paper." And the window that had opened between us closed with a click. Aunt Carol called me that night, as if she'd felt a disturbance. I told her about the conversation, and she was quiet a moment. "Fear explains a person, honey," she said. "It doesn't excuse them." 6 days to the dinner. I stopped rehearsing apologies and started rehearsing silence. The answer to Rick's riddle walked into my office that same week, wearing a supplier's jacket. One of my bookkeeping clients manages accounts at the equipment wholesaler on the east side, and while we went over his quarterlies, he mentioned carefully, the way people mention things they've decided you deserve to know, that Mitchell Heating and Air was on a cash-only basis with them now. 90 days past due. Bank getting twitchy about the equipment line. "He's been telling people a family investment is coming through," my client said, not looking at me. "Figured you'd want to know what your name's being attached to." I sat with my coffee going cold and did the math I suddenly realized I'd been avoiding. Rick's 22%. Plus the so-called family fund, 8%, managed by Rick. Together they'd have plugged his hole with room to spare. The Mitchell family distribution agreement wasn't a philosophy of fairness. It was a bailout wearing my mother's apron. And here's the part that genuinely made me sad, sitting there in the bread smell with the numbers staring up at me. If my brother had knocked on my door with his books under his arm and said, "Mara, I'm drowning. Help me," I would have run those numbers with him that same night. Restructuring is literally my job. I have saved 3 businesses in this town that his was smaller than. He knew that. Instead, he kicked my door in with a document and called it order. One more thing I learned later, and it changed how I read everything that came after. Rick hadn't told Mom the real depth of it. She was guilt-tripping me to fund a rescue she didn't even know the size of. In my family, it turns out, everyone kept a set of secret books. Mine were just the only honest ones. The Tuesday before the dinner, I sat in Ellen's office one last time, and we went down the checklist like pilots. The trust was funded. The prize was claimed. The lump sum had landed the week before, quietly, and the state's public notice said only that the Route 48 jackpot had been paid to the Cardinal Trust. My name appeared nowhere a cousin could find it. And then there was the one provision I want you to know I wrote in at the very beginning, back in that beige conference room, before any of the ugliness peaked. Because it matters to me that you know it wasn't a concession squeezed out of me at a dinner table. The trust would pay school costs for my niece and my 2 nephews. Tuition, fees, books, straight through college if they want it, paid directly to the schools. Every semester, never passing through a single adult Mitchell hand. Those kids never billed me for anything. They're the only ones who can say that. Ellen reviewed it all, then folded her glasses and looked at me the way she does when she's about to say something that isn't billable. "You know you're allowed to just not go," she said. "Mail them a letter. You never have to sit in that room." I'd thought about it, honestly. Skipping it was safe, but they had set a table to watch me sign away my future, invited witnesses, hired a stamp. They wanted an audience for my signature. They could have one for my answer. "No," I told her. "They set the table. They'll get to watch me decline. Properly, in front of everyone they invited." Ellen almost smiled, which for Ellen is a standing ovation. People think revenge is loud. Mine fit in a manila folder. Saturday night, I laid it all out on my kitchen table like a surgeon's tray, which Josie would tell you is exactly the kind of thing I do. Item 1. The letter from the trustee, on heavy letterhead, confirming that the prize had been claimed by the Cardinal Trust, that the trust was irrevocable, that its principal could not be assigned, pledged, gifted, or withdrawn on demand by any person, including the beneficiary, and that any inquiries could be directed to their office during business hours, which is the politest sentence ever to contain a knife. Item 2. The statement of record. 8 pages, brass fastener, both columns totaled. I read it through once more, made sure the roof was dated right, made sure the $800 sat where the eye would land on it. Then I closed the folder, vanilla-colored because I am my father's daughter and we do not buy dramatic office supplies, and I set my dad's green ledger on top of the stack. That one wasn't for them. That one was for me, riding along in my bag like a hand on my shoulder. I pressed my good blouse. I practiced saying 3 sentences out loud to the kitchen window until they came out level. At 11, Brooke texted me, "Don't embarrass Mom tomorrow. She's been through enough." I looked at that text for a long time, this message from my baby sister, on the eve of a dinner where 11 people planned to watch me sign away 92% of my own money. Don't embarrass Mom. I put the phone face down and went to bed, and I slept like a paid invoice. I checked that folder 3 times before bed, the way I triple-check returns in tax season. If you've ever had to armor yourself with paperwork just to sit at your own family's table, type, "My book is balanced," in the comments. I'll know exactly what you carried in with you. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because the next 10 minutes of this story are the reason you clicked. Aunt Carol showed up at my office Friday the day before, with 2 coffees and the unhurried air of a woman who has held dying people's hands and is therefore impossible to rush. She's my dad's younger sister, 66, a retired nurse. She sat in my client chair, looked at the green ledger on my desk, and her whole face changed. "He taught you," she said. It wasn't a question. And then Carol told me a story I had never heard in 34 years. In 1996, my dad's younger brother won a workers' comp settlement. His back, the plant, decent money for the time. Within a month, she said, Lorraine had organized a family plan for it. A meeting at the house. Papers. The whole family watching while he signed. Because only a selfish man walks away from family, and your uncle was many things, but he could not stand to be called that in a room full of people. 2 years later, the money was gone. Every dollar of it. Absorbed into the family like water into sand, and he moved to Tennessee and never came back for so much as a funeral. Frank started keeping that book the same month, Carol said, nodding at the ledger. Your father watched it happen and couldn't stop it. He was a quiet man, so he did a quiet thing. He wrote it down. I sat there feeling the floor of my whole childhood shift half an inch. The script they were running on me was not improvised. It was a revival. Carol finished her coffee and stood to go, and at the door she said the thing I carried into that dinner like a coat. "I'll be there Sunday, honey. Somebody at that table should be sitting on your side of it." Sunday came smelling like green bean casserole and ambush. My mother's dining room can seat 12 at the old oak table that was my grandmother's, under the brass chandelier my dad always meant to rewire, and that night, it was full. Mom at the head, of course. Rick and his wife to her right. Rick in a collared shirt, which meant business. Brooke and Todd to her left, Todd with a leather portfolio in front of him like a placemat. Uncle Gary, Aunt Carol, who caught my eye when I came in, and gave me a nod so small only a niece would register it. 2 cousins, including Dana, who could not stop touching her silverware. Pat from next door, holding her purse in her lap like a seatbelt. And in the corner, on a folding chair from the garage, sat a pleasant woman of about 50 with a zippered bag on her knees. The notary. Her name was Linda. She had the studiously neutral expression of a woman being paid by the signature and beginning to have doubts about the gig. At my place setting, someone had laid the agreement, plastic cover freshly wiped, yellow tabs aligned, and next to it a pen. There was a bow on the pen. I want that detail preserved forever. A bow, on the pen, that they expected me to use to sign away 92% of my own lottery win. My mother stood, tapped her water glass with a spoon, and beamed at all of us. "Tonight," she said, "we heal this family." I sat down, folded my hands on top of my vanilla folder, and said nothing at all. Ellen's voice in my head, dry as sandpaper. Let them finish the whole show. Witnesses work both ways. Todd stood up between the casserole and the rolls and gave a presentation. "I sell insurance," he began. "So believe me when I say I understand protecting a family's future. And somewhere in the great beyond, every actuary who ever lived rolled over at once." He had printouts. He passed them around the table like hymn sheets. Across the top of each one, in letters I could read upside down, "Fair split. Everyone wins." He walked the table through the percentages with a salesman's rhythm, pausing for nods. 30 for Mom, because she gave us everything. 22 for Rick. Business stabilization, jobs stay in the family, very fiscally responsible. 22 for himself and Brooke, a fresh start. And here Brooke did a small squeeze of Todd's elbow like they'd rehearsed it. 10 for the extended family, and both cousins nodded solemnly, mourners at the funeral of my bank account. 8 into the family fund, Rick's steady hands, etc. And then Todd got to my line and performed generosity. "And Mara keeps 8%, $336,000. Plus, we handle the family fund so she's never burdened. Honestly, she comes out ahead here." Around that table, people I had known my whole life nodded along, and Dana actually said, "That's so generous," to no one in particular. Then my mother rose again, glass in hand, and looked down the length of my grandmother's table at me with her chin set, and delivered the closing argument in front of 11 witnesses, slow and clear, like a verdict. "You'd be selfish to keep it, Mara. Tonight you get to prove you love this family." Rick slid the agreement across the oak, and the pen with the bow came to rest in front of me, and 11 pairs of eyes waited for my hand. I did not touch the pen. I looked down the table at Todd, and I asked my question in the voice I use for client intake, pleasant and flat as a spreadsheet. "One question, Todd. Your percentages, are they calculated on 4.2 million before taxes, or after?" The room made a sound like a record catching. Todd blinked and looked at his portfolio, and I watched him flip a page, then flip it back. Which in my profession we call the answer. Well, the gross figure. But taxes are basically a rounding. Rick cut in, jaw tight. "Taxes are a detail, Mara. Don't do this. Taxes are a third, give or take," I said, still pleasant. "Federal and state. Before anyone here spends $1, roughly a third of this pie doesn't exist. You've all been passing around slices of money that was never real." I watched it land around the table in little ways. Dana stopped touching her silverware. Uncle Gary frowned at his printout like it had said something rude to him. Pat from next door looked at my mother, and for the first time all evening, not warmly. It's a small thing, catching a math error out loud. But an audience that has just watched the presenters get the size of the pie wrong by a third starts wondering, quietly, in the backs of their minds, what else got counted wrong in that shiny plastic cover. My mother rapped her knuckles once on the oak, a gavel from my childhood, and her voice lost its bunting. "Sign first," she said. "Numbers later." And those exact words, in that exact order, from my own mother, is when I opened my folder. I took out the trustee's letter, turned it to face them, and slid it across my grandmother's table. One smooth push, the paper hissing over the oak until it stopped in front of Todd, right on top of "fair split." Everyone wins. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, "you'll want to read that. Out loud is fine. We hired a room full of witnesses after all." Todd picked it up. I will remember the sound of that paper shaking slightly in his hands for the rest of my life. He read it out loud because he didn't know yet what it was, and by the time he did, he couldn't stop without making it worse. The prize associated with the Route 48 drawing was claimed earlier this month, claimed by the Cardinal Trust. The trust is irrevocable. Its principal may not be assigned, pledged, gifted, or withdrawn on demand by any person, including, and here, Todd's voice thinned out to a hum, including the beneficiary. He set the letter down and looked at me the way you'd look at a vending machine that had just spoken to you. The money already has a home, I said, to the whole table, keeping my voice exactly where I practice keeping it. It moved in weeks ago, before you set this table. Nothing I sign tonight can move it out. Not your agreement, not a promise, not a guilt trip. On the advice of a very good attorney, I made sure of that. Even I can't hand it to you. That was the point. Silence has a texture, and this one was thick enough to stand a spoon in. Pat's tea glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Dana's mouth was open. The chandelier buzzed faintly, the way it has since 2009. And in the corner, without a word, Linda the notary quietly clicked her stamp bag shut. Rick's chair screeched back, and he came up out of it with both palms flat on the table. "Undo it," he said, loud enough that his wife flinched. "Whatever you signed, unsign it. Call the lawyer Monday." Irrevocable means what it means, Rick. It's the first word they teach. Then sue the lawyer. She tricked you. Todd had his phone out now, scrolling with his thumb like a man bailing water, muttering about undue influence, about contesting, about consumer protection, and I let him get all the way to the end of his rope before I answered. "Contest what, Todd? I'm the beneficiary. You want to stand in front of a judge and argue that I unduly influenced myself into protecting my own lottery ticket? Take that to any lawyer in Ohio. Ask them not to laugh before you've paid the consultation fee." Brooke's voice came in high and cracking. "You planned this. You sat at Mom's table eating pot roast and you'd already planned all of it." "No," I said. "I prepared. Planning is what you did, Brooke. Planning is a notary and a pen with a bow on it." And then my mother, who had not moved, spoke in the low, wounded voice that has ended every family argument since before I was born. "After everything this family has sacrificed for you, Mara." The room turned to me to watch it land. I looked back at her and felt my heart beat, level as a metronome, and it occurred to me that I had been training for this conversation my entire working life. "Name one," I said gently, "one sacrifice, with a date on it." And into that silence, from the far end of the table, came the sound of my cousin Dana, of all people, whispering to Gary, "Can they really not touch it?" Not we. They. Rats. Ship. Etc. My mother heard it too, and her eyes went flat. That's when I brought out the second document, the one I'd built across 3 evenings at my kitchen table, and slid it down the oak to my mother, 8 pages under a brass fastener. "Since we're doing family accounting in public now," I said, "here's mine. It's called a statement of record. Column 1 is everything I've given this family in 11 years. Column 2 is what happened the one time I asked." Nobody moved to pick it up, so I recited the only 3 lines they needed, from memory, in the tone I used to read a client their own numbers. October 2019, Mom's roof, $4,300, paid to the contractor. March, the year I was 26. My transmission died in tax season. I asked this family for $800. The answer is printed exactly as it was said to me. "We don't have it to spare. Fall semester, 3 years ago. My nephew's school fees, paid in full, quietly, so nobody at this table would be embarrassed." I looked up. The bottom of column 1 says $61,400. The bottom of column 2 says 0. 11 years. I heard the same sentence at every door I knocked on. So here is my answer to your agreement, and I'd like the notary to hear it. We don't have it to spare. Turns out, neither do I. Then I reached into my bag and set the last thing on the table. A green cloth ledger, worn at the corners. I opened it to the final page and turned it toward my mother. "Dad kept a book too," I said. Her face, reading that penciled line, is something I have decided not to describe, because some accounts you close in private. Aunt Carol read it upside down from her seat and pressed her hand flat to her mouth. "Mara, Ode, Nothing. She never asked. The second silence was longer than the first. Even the chandelier seemed to hold it. My mother stood up too fast, and one hand went to the back of her chair, and the other fluttered to her chest, and she announced to the room that she was dizzy, that her heart was doing something, that this is what her children had done to her. Chairs scraped. Gary lunged for her elbow. Brooke cried out, "Mom!" with a look of pure fury aimed at me across the table, and for a moment the whole dinner tipped toward the story they would have told about tonight forever after. The night Mara's selfishness put their mother on the floor. Except my mother had invited a retired nurse. Aunt Carol came around the table with no particular hurry, sat Lorraine down, took her wrist, and looked at her watch. Then she reached into that bottomless purse of hers and produced the blood pressure cuff she has carried since the Reagan administration, wrapped my mother's arm and pumped it up while the room held its breath. Carol read the number. She let the air out slowly. "You're fine, Lorraine," she said, in her nurse voice, the one that closes conversations. "Sit down and drink some water." And the performance, having been examined and billed correctly, ended. What was left, when the fear of the body drained out of the room, was just fury, undisguised at last. My mother pointed at me, arms straight, an Old Testament gesture. "You are no daughter of mine if you walk out of this house tonight." Rick fired from the other flank. "You'll be alone. You get that? Holidays, funerals, every empty chair. That's your choosing." I picked up my folder, squared its edges out of pure habit, and stood. "I've been alone in this family for 11 years, Rick," I said. "The only difference now is better furniture." At the doorway to the living room, I stopped, because there was one more entry to read into the record, and I wanted every witness in the room to have it exact. "The trust does make one set of payments," I said. "It was written in from the very first draft, weeks before tonight, so no one here gets to think they negotiated it. School costs for Emma, Tyler, and Sam. Tuition, fees, books, through college, if they want to go. Paid every semester, directly to the schools. It never touches a checking account belonging to anyone at this table." I watched Rick's wife put her hand over her eyes, and I genuinely don't know if it was relief or shame, and I've decided it can be both. Brooke started forward. "Okay, so we'll manage it for them. They're minors. It makes sense for us to directly to the schools." She stopped like she'd hit glass. "The kids never billed me for anything," I said. "They're the only people in this family who can say that." Then I looked at my mother, small and furious at the head of my grandmother's table, and gave her back her own word, the one she'd hung around my neck in front of the church, the cousins, and the soup. "Mom, selfish is the word people reach for when your money stops being theirs. I've been called it for 3 weeks now, and here's what I notice. I slept fine last night. First time in years." I picked my coat off the hook by the china cabinet, the hook that has been mine since I was tall enough to reach it. "The money already has a home," I said. "It isn't here." I walked out through the living room I grew up in, past the school photos on the wall where I am eternally 11 with crooked bangs, and nobody said my name. The agreement stayed on the table, unsigned, its yellow tabs pointing at nothing, next to a pen with a bow on it. As I passed her folding chair, Linda the notary stood up, and for a second I thought she meant to block my way. Instead, she gave me a small, formal nod, the kind one professional gives another across a conference table, and began packing her bag with the unhurried relief of a woman who would not be billing this family, after all. Gary studied the carpet. Dana studied her phone. Pat from next door caught my eye and then looked at my mother, and something in Pat's face had permanently changed addresses. On the porch, the storm door hissed shut behind me, and then it opened again, and it was Carol. She didn't say anything wise at first. She just hugged me, hard, the way nurses hug, like they're checking your ribs while they're at it. Then she held me out at arm's length. "Your father used to say you were the only one who'd leave this family richer than you found it," she said. "He meant the book, honey, not the money." I drove home through Dayton with the windows down and my dad's ledger riding shotgun, past the gas station on Route 48 with its lottery sign glowing red and white in the dark, and the whole city smelled like cut grass and closed accounts. My phone started buzzing before I hit the second stoplight. I let it. Some calls you return, some you just record. That was 6 months ago, and here is the accounting, because you've earned it. My mother calls every Sunday at 4. I answer about 10 minutes worth. We discuss her tomatoes and Pat's gallbladder, and no apology has ever been attempted in either direction, which is its own kind of honesty. She has stopped saying the word selfish. She has not started saying the word sorry. I've decided I can live inside that particular spread. Rick did not speak to me for 9 weeks. And then, quietly, without ever calling it what it was, he sold one of his trucks, sat down with his bank, and restructured the equipment loan himself. Turns out my brother could do math the whole time. He just needed to run out of people who would do it for him. His kids' school invoices go straight to the trustee now, and in October, an envelope came to my office in careful 12-year-old handwriting. A thank you card from Emma, with a drawing of a cardinal on the front, which nobody prompted and I will be keeping forever, filed under assets. Brooke unfollowed me everywhere, which in her currency is excommunication, and Todd sends the occasional article about trust litigation, which I hope he's paying for. The cousins still text on holidays, warm little messages with no dollar amounts in them, and honestly, that's all I ever wanted from a cousin. The Lake House Pinterest board is gone. The family group chat goes on without me, presumably still full of articles about how money changes people. It does, you know, just usually not the person holding it. As for me, my life did change, in the boring, sturdy ways I always intended. The trust sends my distribution on schedule, and this spring I bought the building my office sits in, bakery and all, which means my landlord is now me, and I have found her very reasonable. I hired a second accountant so Josie could finally move up to office manager, a promotion she celebrated by relabeling everything I own. On Saturday mornings, I go downstairs and learn bread from the baker, flour up to my elbows, phone in a drawer, and I am telling you, there are kinds of rich that money is only the doorway to. I still answer when family calls. I just stopped answering for them. For their debts, their optics, their emergencies manufactured on my schedule. That's the whole boundary. It fits on an index card. Ellen gets a Christmas card from me every year now, and my dad's green ledger sits on my office shelf next to the tax code, both of them books about what people owe each other, only one of them honest about it. Sometimes a new client sits down across from me, wrung out, ashamed, whispering that their family has gotten strange about money, and I slide the tissues over and tell them the truest thing I own. The money already has a home. So do I. Neither one is up for a vote at anybody's dinner table. Here is what $4.2 million taught me, and it only took 8% of a dining room table to learn it. The people who call you selfish for keeping what's yours were never planning to share what was theirs. That's my story. One ticket, one mistake, 2 pieces of paper, and a family that finally showed me its books. If this reminded you that no is a complete sentence, or that paperwork done early beats tears done late, share this video with someone who's always been the reliable one. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have slid across that table. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next one.